Cars such as the Batmobile, the General Lee, and Smokey and the Bandit's Trans Am become legendary and characters in their own right. And often the stars of the movies are the car themselves. But like with any production, there's plenty behind the scenes that we don't get to see. And this includes some legendary builders, many which got their start in the custom scene from Southern California, where it's not uncommon to see half a dozen of the same exact vehicle waiting for their moment in the spotlight. Some of the most iconic cars have come straight out of Hollywood. So for this episode and the next few, we're going to the movies. Obviously, specifically movie cars. This one, we're going to be looking at some of the most iconic ones. Obviously, everyone knows the Batmobile, Back to the Future with the DeLorean. Everything up to, Joe Dirt's Charger. And what kind of spawned this was Fall Guy. The movie's coming out, Ryan Gosling, but the iconic TV show that had that GMC pickup truck in it kind of stood in the mind of a lot of people from, the 80s.
Oh, absolutely. It was something that I would hold on to all the time. The Fall Guy was on Thursday night at 9 p.m., so that'll tell you how much I know.
Yeah, 30, 40 years later, you still know what time it was on and what time you had to be there.
That's right. It was after the A-Team, which is another one.
Yeah, A-Team van.
Right.
So we're going to be looking at this episode to a lot of those iconic ones. Coming up, we're going to look a little bit more into just kind of overall car movies and even movies that aren't car related at all, but did you know that you had to have 5 cars, to make a hero car, to make a, something stand out?
Okay, so let's start with that. Let's start with some terminology, because like you just said hero car. So what's a hero car?
So a hero car is obviously going to be the one that is like the best condition, most drivable, the one you don't want to mess up.
Right. You
don't want to crash it. You don't want to, shoot, rounds through it, all that kind of stuff. And so they would usually have, 3 or 4 or 5, or more, depending on, or what, 270 or something, if it's the General Lee.
Exactly. You're right.
You would have other ones that were used for different purposes that maybe didn't have an engine, didn't have an interior, just looked like it, so you could, crash it through a wall or something like that, or jump it. And then they'd have like your cutaway car that would be obviously at the time, easier to film interior shots, of people talking or driving, something like that.
Well, and that's also too, there's 2 reasons for that, to have like what they call a cutaway car.
Yeah.
And cutaway cars are things they've used all the way into the 1920s even.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Since the beginning.
And the main reason for it is first off, a camera can't have that lens.
Well,
right?
and that's
try to put a camera in a car. Basically
now
a
you
GoPro,
can,
right?
Now you can, but and they'll still use them. But back then, the cameras were huge, and there was just no way to work that into, especially though back then they were small cars.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Right. And then the other reason why is it's to allow the actor themselves or the actors to feel comfortable enough to remember their lines. They don't have to sit there and think like, oh my God, I got to drive. And then also think about, oh, look out for little Johnny running across the street, right?
Well, and that's what's funny is then, a lot of times you would see in those old movies where they're just not paying attention, seesawing and going perfectly straight. And that's then because, they weren't trained on it. They didn't have to actually drive. So then it, kind of looked a little cheesy.
Right.
So obviously a lot of that's improved a lot more. We'll get into some of those stunt techniques and filming techniques later on, but let's start with, I think for a lot of people, probably you say movie car, you're going probably either Batmobile or Bullitt is like your first love.
Well, yeah, let's look at that, because Bullitt kind of was the first big time car chase movie where the last, I want to say 8 to 12 minutes of the movie is just racing.
It's a race on San Francisco streets.
Right.
Steve McQueen, who raced in automotive racing, raced motocross, he was a legit car person, and,
right.
and so he had the star power at the time to kind of force the hand, I guess you could say, of maybe some of the studios to do a movie just basically about a car almost.
Right.
That's why it's called the Bullitt Mustang.
Right.
So that was a 67?
It was a 68.
68 fastback.
Mm-hmm. With a 390 in it.
With 390, all, green.
Yeah.
It's pretty known, pretty iconic. And then I think even a few years ago, they found one of the original ones in Mexico.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that's what's kind of crazy is that some of them have been kept, as they should be, maybe as a museum piece or an iconic thing.
Right.
But sometimes it's, especially if it's, the third in a line of 4 or 5, it's just, all right, whatever. That's just another car.
And like you mentioned, though, too, I mean, there's cars used for different things throughout the movies. So to find
some of them are going to be a crash car.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Some of them might be the stunt car that you might find. But, they did find the legitimate hero car from Mexico. And even back then, too, they weren't thinking that was going to be so iconic. They were thinking, what's the next movie that.
Yeah, they're just, it or probably even gets reused.
Yeah.
Which is the case with the original Batmobile.
Correct.
So that actually, George Barris gets a lot of the credit on that. There's some behind the scenes stuff that we'll talk about. But that was actually a 59 Lincoln Futura concept car.
That's right.
And supposedly it cost, Ford Motor Company, Lincoln, $250,000.
In that money.
In 50s money.
In 50s money.
In 50s money to make and to produce. And kind of really didn't do a whole lot of much of anything. It was in a movie just as its, stock form in the late 50s. But then George Barris picked it up for allegedly $1.
Which makes,
it was just sitting around.
Yeah, and companies do that. They'll sell it to somebody as $1. They'll create it as a loss. They'll write it in their taxes. Yeah. Done deal.
Yeah. So, he got his hands on that. But what actually kind of happened a little bit with that, with the Batmobile, is that a guy named Dean Jeffries originally kind of had the contract to build it, but they, like everything in movies in Hollywood, it's a lot, last minute, late nights, and I guess they wanted it within 2-3 weeks.
Sure.
And he couldn't do it,
right?
Or just wasn't willing to do it necessarily. So, Barris got the contract for it. And of course, I think probably Dean Jeffries was looking at, building something from scratch.
Right.
Well, George was like, well, that's kind of weird looking,
It's similar.
And so just modify that, throw some paint on it, throw some, I think you were saying some sprinkler heads. Or something.
That's one thing. If you guys ever get a chance to look at the Batmobile up close, take a look at the front bumper. There's 2 fluorescent orange, they're sprinkler heads.
Yeah.
Right. But it just goes to show you in the movies, you make anything happen. And part of that is obviously during the TV series, they use that to their gas or whatever.
Like smoke screen
the
or your
gas.
oil or
whatever.
something.
Yeah,
all those, yeah.
But there's a lot of little things like there's a lot of household things on that car that you would look at and go like, oh my God, that's, a faucet handle from this and it was just the imagination of what they came up with to make it look like that.
And Barris was more known for those kinds of things than the tasteful customs.
Right.
We're talking, his brother Sam, the two of them started late 40s, into the early 50s doing customs down in, Southgate, Linwood, like the Tweedy Boulevard, the row of all customizers. You had the hot rodders a little further out and you had that row of customizers.
Right.
But,
which I find kind of interesting too for the movie industry to go to the customizers, because clearly those guys were the guys, hey, I'm going to chop the top on a Merc and create the
Hirohito Merc. Yeah.
Right.
No, and that's, Sam, more specifically, the Hirohito Merc, which is one of the most iconic, customs.
Right.
And, a la carte, which, won several, different shows and stuff like that.
Right.
And, he kind of got out of the business and George really picked up and leaned into the movie car business. So George Barris was also, responsible for the work on like the Munsters TV show.
Correct.
So the Dragula, the Munsters coach, the Beverly Hillbillies car.
Right. The Monkeys GTO.
The Monkeys GTO, which was through Barris.
Sure.
But was actually, built by somebody else.
Okay.
So that was another Dean Jeffries
I was just
kind of
going to mention
creation.
that. That's a lot of his work,
So, and Dean Jeffries, I think, is probably more known as a painter customizer.
Correct.
In now, whereas Barris is known as the movie car
guy.
kind of guy. But Dean Jeffries was also, a stuntman, obviously built customs. He's the one that did the little bastard sign painting on James Dean's Porsche.
Yes.
And he actually did, created the original Black Beauty for the Green Hornet series,
right?
Which is around same time, slightly before, the original Batman TV show.
Which obviously the Green Hornet starred Bruce Lee.
Yeah. And so Bruce Lee, and so that was a Chrysler Imperial that they used on that one. But so he had originally kind of gotten the contract for the Batmobile, probably because of maybe the Green Hornet work.
Probably.
But then it passed to Barris, and Barris hired a guy named Bill Cushenberry to do all the actual work on it. And Bill was kind of a little more of a technical guy.
Okay.
So later on, he would help out with a lot of the camera mounts for the Le Mans movie, which I know we'll talk a little bit about that, in another episode on car movies and racing movies. But yeah, Dean Jeffries also did everything. Yeah, the Monkey GTO. He did Moon Buggy for James Bond.
Right.
The Convoy, Death Ray. So he had a good career as far as that goes.
Well, and think about it too, because at the time, looking back at Hollywood, the mid '60s is when we started to see cars come into play a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, obviously the baby boomers were hip on cars, so the movies went after them.
Popularity of cars and customizing cars just became a huge thing. So obviously Hollywood's always, art reflects reality or whatever the term is. So it's gonna start to pop up more in movies.
And it just so happened that it also happened in Southern California where the movie industry is. So a lot of these customizer guys that are like, taking trophies at the car show on Sunday are going to their day job making movie cars, throughout the week.
Yeah, you're not necessarily making money building some show car, here and there maybe, but you can, pay the bills and keep the shop open with working for the movies.
And with Hollywood down the street, just totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a lot of the kind of foundation of that car customizing deal. And like I said, it was contracted out to a lot of the customizers.
Right.
But then as things went along, obviously shops, just geared towards the movie and TV industry and cars, and not even just fancy custom cars, but just in general, hey, you need a taxi cab?
Right.
Okay. They can handle all of that. So, but let's get into some of the other like iconic cars that we remember from TV, from movies back in the day. Obviously we've mentioned all the Batmobiles. The first one started out with that. Then that kind of in the 80s turned to full. You're going full custom, on the Batmobile, and it's going pretty crazy. So there's guys like Carl Casper's Customs that did a lot of the work on like the Batman Returns, kind of the big shark fin Batmobile, I guess you could call it.
Right.
Even up until the recent movies with the off-road one,
the Tumbler,
the Tumbler, where it's all just full custom concept, basically. You're working off someone's concept art, the production designer or whoever, and then you're just going custom.
Well, Bruce Wayne's got the cash, so he's got the cash for the toys, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's the billionaire, so he can handle all of that. One of the ones that had that kind of capitalized on the custom craze, was Grease.
Yes.
Grease Lightning. That's a car. That's one of the cars.
It's one of the cars, right?
And a guy that grew up with Eddie Paul. Mm-hmm. He had a lot to do with some of the building of those, and they're kind of out there,
right?
For like what a custom would be. They're like your 40s, Merc or Ford and stuff like
Fords,
that.
Yeah,
but
the big tub cars.
Mm-hmm. But they were kind of out there a little bit.
Well, and okay, first off, let's rewind for a minute, because most car guys would say Grease as a car movie. They kind of question that.
No, but the cars in the movie.
But the cars,
are fairly iconic.
Right. And I think we were just talking about this off camera. We were saying like, as far as like a car chase in that movie, it's not really too exciting.
It's not a good car chase.
Right, it's not a good car chase. I mean,
it's pretty boring.
But Eddie Paul though too. Eddie Paul was, again, he had a shop called Customs by Eddie Paul at that time. And he was pumping out a lot of custom cars for a lot of different people, but he was also a diehard movie car guy. He was one of the guys that, came from that stuntman association type thing that began, prepping cars for these movies. So, things like Eddie also was involved with like Corvette Summer. He was involved, obviously, Grease. Those were some of the kind of the 70s things. He worked with H.B. Heilicki too on Gone in 60 Seconds, the one that was obviously the 70s version, the original one. Yeah. But, Eddie grew into a lot of other things too. He grew into things that even all the way up until his death, he was still building movie cars.
Talk Fast and Furious to
Triple X. He built
Triple X,
the GTO for Triple X.
Yeah,
he built
the movie Cars, the animated movie. They hired
made a
him to make replicas, to tour around and to showcase.
Yeah.
He had a lot to do with. Throughout the industry, throughout the history of it.
Right. And Eddie was one of those guys that he was a kind of a self-taught engineer, but had that kind of mind that, he might not have been formally educated, but you say, hey, I need a shark to jump over that tank over there. Hold my beer. And he was that kind of guy.
Yeah.
And I do mention shark because he had a little shark obsession for a while and made a mechanical shark and stuff like that. It was that kind of stuff.
And that's the thing too. A lot of, obviously there is specialized, movie car, production houses, but sometimes like it would be, it's metalwork, paint, electronics,
right.
Maybe a motor, like
some robotics here and there.
Yeah. Hey, they probably might go to the same people if they needed an animatronic shark or this and that. 'Cause that also in the 70s was when, like ILM and the, Star Wars, like all the prop making and robotics and stop motion, like was really coming into its own and becoming a thing, becoming an industry.
Right, exactly. And that's, that time too, we're talking models.
As far as
Star Wars, that kind of stuff, they were using a lot of models where, car industry, you can use the model for a few
here
things,
and there,
but most of the time it's full size and it's, stuntmen driving them. Of course, the movies that we would appreciate too as well is, you want to see a stuntman driving it.
Yeah. And that's kind of always the funny thing. And they've gotten better, obviously, over the years of seeing, the car scene, driving down the road and, clearly seeing that it's in a studio and it's just a, stock film or something going in the background.
Right.
But one of the ones, too, that's been iconic was like the James Bond cars.
Oh yeah.
He Austin Martin guy, of course then in the 90s, BMW kind of worked their way in to, give, the British Secret Service a German car.
Right.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
But
the DB5 though is the one.
That's the recognizable kind of iconic one. And of course throughout all the different movies they would have, all the little tricks, the smoke screens, the oils, the eject button, all the Q gadgets that you put on the cars and stuff like that.
Exactly. But they also had another English car though too. They had a Lotus.
Yeah,
for a little bit.
True.
That was the Roger Moore years.
Yeah, weird. Yeah,
yeah. So they had the Lotus Esprits and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So, but for the most part, James Bond has been a staple as far as usually the opening scene or some type of car chase. Is usually
there's always something
in the movie.
that features it. Like that's a character in the James Bond kind of genre.
Now,
of it.
I heard a rumor that in one of the later movies, like when they're driving the DB9s, there's a car chase where they broke a record.
Yeah.
Oh shit!
We're doing a whole episode on.
I'm just fuck. All right. Well, we'll cut that.
So you've been following along on Auto Revolution. You know that we're a big fan of Chevy OBS trucks, and Beltec suspension has been around for 40 years, and they were one of the first innovators of the sport truck movement back in the 80s. And we've been lucky with them to partner on a few different projects, from the OBS Clash documentary series to the Tahoe Unlimited, and even a few things that we've got up our sleeves coming out later this year. What's really cool is they've partnered with us to offer free shipping if you use the code AutoRevolution24 at Beltec.com. So whether it's a lowering kit on your Chevy or a lift kit on your Bronco or your Jeep, and if you use the code AutoRevolution24 at Beltec.com, you're going to get free shipping. Now back to the show.
If we're talking 1970s movies, car chases, car movies, car anything, the movie you got to bring up is Smokey and the Bandit, because that's a life changer.
Yeah. Well, and that Pontiac Trans Am, that kind of put that era of car in muscle car into the stratosphere and into the public eye,
Obviously.
because that was the 70s when muscle cars were kind of starting to go away a little bit.
Right.
But and it wasn't that directed by a former stuntman.
Yes, Hal Needham.
Yeah.
It was written, directed, and obviously he did
Did a lot of stunt coordination
Right.
and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So amazing movie. I mean, I can't say enough about this movie. It's one of those movies that if it's on TV, I'm watching it every single time. So it is one of those movies that it's just, to me, it's comfort food to watch that, you know?
No, and that's, I mean, and they didn't, I don't think they really did anything different to that car necessarily.
No,
I mean, that's
so the funny story about that, Pontiac did not want to give them those cars. Hal Needham actually talked Pontiac into giving him those cars. And the idea about it too, they only gave him 3.
Oh, wow.
So,
and that's, we mentioned at the beginning of this, of the whole hero car thing, the cutaway, the crash car, you know,
right.
If you had your iconic car that was going to be used throughout the movie in multiple scenes, you wanted several of them.
Right.
Because you didn't want to have to sit for 3-4 weeks to have a body shop repair it to then get literally not even the next scene, but maybe redo that scene.
Right, exactly. Because, I mean, let's look at the iconic bridge jump. I mean, the car's destroyed.
Yeah.
There's no way. So they had to probably do that shot at the end of the movie, right? Because obviously they needed that car for other things. And there's a few other jumps in that movie. There's the jump where they jump into the kids playing football, stuff like that. So that was probably the same car. They probably did the football jump first, and then
they're like, okay,
jump.
here's one. Yeah. Here's our
this
jump
is our
car,
trash car. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
But no, and that's one of the things that I remember just as obviously this is completely different, but from the Hangover movie.
Okay,
I was actually at Cinema Vehicles right around that time period, and they had 3 of those Mercedes, convertibles.
Yeah,
and I remembered specifically seeing one that was completely smashed up.
Right.
Next to it was one that was in perfect condition.
Right.
And one that had the tiger
all the
scratches on the
interior and everything.
Yeah, on the interior and the convertible roof. So that's you had to have multiples for multiple uses and throughout the movie, because if something happens, you're behind schedule, over budget, and you're screwed.
Well, at that time too, with Smokey and the Bandit's success, because obviously they made part 2 and part 3.
Yeah.
Which part
2.
Yeah, part 2.
1, part 2.
Yeah, we're done. Right.
Just
yeah. No,
I think they've even made more ones than that. I think they made like 6 or 7.
What?
I think so.
Wow. Okay.
But I don't think anyone claims those.
Right.
Yeah.
But that also just showed the popularity of car movies at that time.
Yeah. Just integrating the cars into it.
Right.
And that TV shows were kind of a big counterpart of that. And we mentioned about having 200 plus General Lees.
Oh, easily.
For Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah.
Because it was a TV show that pretty much centered around a car chase from the police, and jumping over some ravine or river to get away.
Right.
And so you had to have tons of those, Dodge Chargers, right?
Dodge Chargers.
Yeah, Dodge Chargers, and obviously they were iconically painted. Kind of looked like the NASCAR race car,
that was the idea.
Deals of the time.
Right.
But they were, and they had kind of all hands on deck as far as like the car shops in Southern California to keep up with that.
Oh yeah.
And that's what's kind of funny is you go, oh yeah, this is an authentic General Lee. I'm like, which.
Yeah.
It's kind of like almost, it's still rare and still cool, but it's not like the one car.
Right,
it's one of 100.
And the Dukes of Hazzard was a spinoff from a movie called Eat My Dust, which was Ron Howard was the star of Eat My Dust, who is a guy that grows up racing around the southern stock car tracks and ends up being a bank robber or something. It's a B movie to watch. But that was kind of the basis for the Dukes of Hazzard, where they took that idea of, basically running away from the police all the time.
Yeah.
And they created a
show about it.
TV show about it. Thank God, too, because that was a show that, being a young kid, the greatest thing was one of my friends I grew up with, his next door neighbor was a stuntman for the Dukes of Hazzard and Chips. So as a, 8 or 9 year old kid, we're running around going like, what's going to happen this Friday? And he would always say,
you're trying to get some tips.
We're trying to get the inside info.
Yeah.
And the hilarious thing is that what I thought was really kind of weird was he would always talk about being in the Roscoe cars.
Yeah, which were the police cars. Yeah.
And he said that what hurt the most was jumping into water. which all of us would say like, oh, cannonball, right? You jump in the water. Well, when you do it into a car and all of a sudden the car stops very quickly, it's worse.
Yeah. Water is liquid, but it's not exactly.
It'll
it's
slow
not
you
a
down
cushion.
quickly. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not a cushion.
Right. So he always said that would hurt him more. Those car chases would definitely be more of a problem. So another big deal about Dukes of Hazzard is, did you know that they held the world record for the longest jump for, I want to say 20 something years.
Wow.
And it wasn't something that they tried to do.
Yeah, they weren't like bringing Guinness over and be like, hey, we're gonna do this. It's just what they did and what it ended up
exactly.
as. Yeah.
So up in the valley, up by Santa Clarita, there was a place called Indian Dunes, and that's where they kind of filmed a lot of different movies throughout the 60s and 70s. Unfortunately, there was the incident with the Twilight Zone movie where Vic Morrow actually lost his life there.
Yeah.
And that's why they kind of stopped filming in around that area. Yeah. But before then, there's a river there, and I can't remember the name of it, but the jump is about 300 feet.
Wow.
And they actually jumped the river. Now, if you watch the opening credits on Dukes of Hazzard, the later, I think after like season 1 or 2, they have that jump in the opening credits.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, they had to epic jump. So.
Oh my God! And it's seriously, it's a humongous jump. It held a record for a very long time. I'm not really sure even who beat it, but.
And did they launch it, or was there an actual driver?
There was a driver. No, there was. That's the thing.
And he's still around.
And he's still around,
or was around afterwards.
Yeah. So no, that was a big deal. Again, to you guys.
And that's the thing too. Like, these are also 60s, 70s cars.
Yes.
They're not like you do that now, it's going to be basically a trophy truck on.
Oh yeah.
Like that kind of a deal, like where it can soak all that up and eat it. That's got to be a hard hit.
Oh, you watch the car fold in half.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. Remember, those cars were unibodies too.
Yeah.
So the K member would be the first thing that just fall right out of the things. So they were pretty harsh on those cars. And the reason why they had over how many cars?
I think it was like 270 or something that were used throughout the whole deal. And that's became. I mean, that's always kind of been a thing within the car movies of jumping.
Right.
It and I always remember, like, I never really watched the Fall Guy, TV show.
Right.
Obviously, timing period. I do always remember seeing that jump of that 80, 81, I think
82,
81, 82 GMC Sierra,
Yeah.
Pickup truck.
Yeah.
And that truck obviously became kind of like, to me, like, that's the iconic look of an 80s kind of off-road square body.
Right.
You had the roll bar with the lights.
Oh yeah.
On the top, lifted.
Yeah. Dixie Peck tires.
Dixie Peck off-road tires.
Oh yeah. And the unusual thing about that, so most of these movies and most movie producers, they'll usually ask a car company to be a partner with them.
Yeah.
So a lot of cars will be donated to these car TV shows.
It helps with the budget. Obviously they're getting publicity, out of it, and probably have access to several of the same vehicle.
Exactly. And during that time, you look at, like, I mentioned Chips. Well, Chips, every episode had some type of car rollover or some type of car
because they were on the highway.
They're on the highway, right.
Literally the basis of the show.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Now, but some of the guys that, the nerds like me that look for all these trucks on these TV shows, the Larry Wilcox blue GMC.
Yeah, custom paint on it as a step side or something.
Right, exactly. Now that was a version that GMC actually produced. Now GMC gave them one of those and told them, don't screw it up.
Yeah, this is your only one. Yeah.
Right? Now, that was a Larry Rossler production, but when Glenn Larson came out with The Fall Guy, the same stunt people said, hey, we know people over at GMC, so of course they contacted GMC. It was a different story. This was like, we're going to go through these trucks.
Yeah. Well, and that's because it was a main character.
It was a main character
of the truck of the TV show,
right?
Versus that was basically the guy's truck to get to the office or get to the police station, the highway patrol station,
right,
to then hop on your Harley,
right?
And Chips, I will say Chips was something I did watch growing up because 3 o'clock reruns, for me at least, and you always had. I think even Eric Estrada was kind of a car guy a little bit. So he would they had street racing episodes, and we even know a couple people that had cars, in the street racing.
He had, that's right. I mean, Jeff Smith and his 55 Chevy, right?
Yeah.
Eric Estrada, even on the movie, or I'm sorry, even on the TV show, he drove an early Trans Am. He drove like a 72 Trans Am. So, it wasn't a Bandit Trans Am, but it was still a cool car for back then.
Yeah. It wasn't just your mom and pop, kind of car getting around. But, but yeah, the 70s and 80s really definitely used the car as a character.
Sure.
Because, you go from your Dukes of Hazzard, your Fall Guy, going to the A-Team.
Right.
We were talking about that earlier with that iconic, van was in there. I mean, 70s van culture.
That's right. Yeah.
But B.A. Baracus, Mr. T.
I mean, that van was cool, though.
Yeah.
That was like one of those, things that, like you mentioned, that during that time, I mean, I don't know how many of my buddies' parents have had custom-made vans, so it made total sense.
And they didn't necessarily look like that one.
No. Yeah, that was a cool one.
But that was, we mentioned Carl Casper.
Right.
He did a lot of work on that. He, you're talking about Dukes of Hazzard having so many cars and so many people. A lot of companies and builders spawned from that because they were just hiring, kind of almost, not whoever they could, but they had to hire a lot of people that then were able to kind of transition and keep that going. So Carr worked on the A-Team, Carr worked on Fall Guy.
Right.
And, then he also, along with George Barris, did the Kit car. For Knight Rider,
right?
Getting to the 80s, the technology, digital, that kind of a deal, and that was his co-star. That was David Hasselhoff's co-star in that TV show.
And what a lot of people don't get about that movie is, or that TV show is, at the time, like to hear a car talk to you was something that was very unusual.
Yeah,
like your cars didn't talk to you. Now there was one car that did talk to you. There was a 1982 Nissan Maxima that had a recorded voice that they made a big deal about because this is at the same time when Knight Rider was coming out. So they took full advantage of that to try to sell those cars. And I remember my buddy's mom bought one of those. And of course they'd say, your door is ajar. And we'd always say, no, it's not. It's a door. But anyway, okay, one of the other styles of movies that were around in the 70s was the ensemble cast. So, you got usually ensemble casts are usually like a rom-com or some kind of deal like that. Yeah. But for car movies, usually you don't get that kind of deal. But Hal Needham, again, with Burt Reynolds, they started Cannonball Run.
That's true.
And the deal with that was get as many popular celebrities as you can, get as many
cool cars
as you can, base it around a real race, because again, the Cannonball Run is a real race, or it was. And that's something that actually started out as a magazine deal first, and they turned it into a movie. But it's a campy movie. It doesn't make a lot of sense unless you actually are kind of a Gen Xer guy, because there's a lot of people that in the movie that you'd go, who's this guy? Right.
Maybe he was hot at the time.
Right. But I mean, you got to look at Jackie Chan that drives a Subaru. And it was a joke. I mean, it was a joke on Asian people, right? Like, why would an Asian guy be in a racing movie at the time? But now you look at it and go, totally makes sense. And the Subaru that's got a rocket power behind it.
No, and what's interesting with that is you mentioned that Subaru. Even later on, Jackie Chan was actually in a movie called Dead Heat.
Okay.
And there's a car chase scene with a Subaru, and Jackie Chan's driving it. And that was like, people have kind of commented or mentioned that as like,
he's a Subaru ambassador?
No, not even recognizing Cannonball Run, but like, this is like pre-Fast and Furious. It's kind of had a lot of those elements of it. So,
sure.
And definitely we'll mention Fast and Furious. We just got to get there.
Yeah.
But no, and that's, I mean, so you're talking Burt Reynolds was, Smoking the Bandit, was the Cannonball Run guy. Kind of transfer that to TV show. To me, Tom Selleck's kind of like the TV show version of Burt Reynolds a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So you have Magnum PI with the Ferrari.
Yeah.
And even when they remade that, or the remaking that TV show, a few years ago,
right?
They had a couple scenes with the original looking, Ferrari, and then they had like the new, brand new Ferrari. And
well,
stuff
there's
like
no
that,
way,
so.
If you're a 308 Ferrari owner, everyone's going to call you Magnum.
Yeah.
I mean, even if the car's painted black.
You're Magnum PI.
Right, you're totally Magnum PI.
Yeah, and don't wear a Hawaiian shirt and have a mustache, or
Detroit.
You're just actually
Detroit Tiger fan.
And Detroit Tiger hat. Yeah. And also too, at that time, Miami Vice.
Oh my
really,
God.
they put Ferraris, Lambo. They put everything because it was Miami drug dealers.
Yeah, made sense.
They were undercover, so
Right.
they had to play the part.
But at the same time, too, like you mentioned, life imitated art. At the time, Miami was the hottest drug dealing
it was
area.
the
in
money. It was the flashy.
That was the
money
place.
town.
Yeah. I have another personal thing about that too, because at the first couple seasons of Miami Vice, Crockett's driving around a Daytona Ferrari, right? The black Daytona Ferrari. It was a Corvette. They were all Corvettes. There was a shop that I worked at when I was 13 that the guys behind them in a little Kwanzaa hut, they were movie car guys. They were just trying to get off the ground, but their contract was Miami Vice. And so they built 4 or 5 of those cars. And I remember that watching for the first time where they took a bicycle reflector, like a round amber bicycle reflector that you'd have on your spokes. I remember that the guy sat there and he hand painted the Ferrari horse to put on the side of it. And I'm like, are they going to see that? Right? I mean, because the car goes by this fast on TV.
Yeah, but you never
they
know.
wanted to be that authentic. So yeah.
Well, not that authentic, but
to get it close enough.
Close as you
right.
could possibly get it.
And the funny thing is in one of the series or one of the seasons, they actually end up blowing up that car, and that's when he entered the Ferrari Testarossa. The reason for that was Ferrari got behind it.
Well, they were probably okay.
You guys are building fake Ferraris that we don't even make anymore.
Yeah.
And we got this brand new Testarossa out here that we're trying to campaign.
Is straight up 80s style.
And it was the straight up 80s deal. So they blew up the black Daytona, and all of a sudden the white Testarossa comes onto the set. So
and that's that kind of that sequence, in the air tonight, slow driving. I mean, it's
totally cool.
Still an iconic deal. And we mentioned, earlier, like Steve McQueen or James Garner, like some of those actors that were actual car guys and into it and actually did racing and stuff like that. You had that kind of on the other side of it where, I remember, Sylvester Stallone, had the movie Cobra that had, that famous Merc.
Yeah.
And he owned one of them.
That's right.
He had it built for him to
Right.
drive as well, so you had your crash cars, you had your stunt cars, and he probably owned the hero car, or he bought it or something.
He did. And again, too, Eddie Paul was the coordinator of building that 50 Merc. Also, too, El Segundo Tire. Again, I'm from El Segundo, so they were also the other guys that built the other 4 Mercs that they obviously trashed in the movie.
And jumping off the loading dock.
Exactly, out of the parking lot, and the jumps at Venice, that kind of thing. So clearly they break him. But Stallone's kind of known for that because Stallone has another vehicle that from the Expendables. He has the 55 Ford truck that he actually kept the hero truck and he kept the smashed truck. So Stallone likes certain things.
Yeah, and he might have had some input on maybe what it wanted to look like.
100% on the F-100, because remember our friend Alex Anderson was the one that put that together for that movie, and Stallone went over everything with Alex. He flat out said, "I want this, I want that," and LMC truck was actually kind of gave a lot of parts to that. So and that continued too, where you look at the Fast and Furious series later, where Paul Walker was a car guy and became even more of a car guy and had his whole collection. Even Vin Diesel had certain things he wanted maybe on his Charger, because that was the extension of that character. That wasn't identifying. We always joke with the car person, maybe I don't remember your name, but I remember what car you drive. It's kind of that same thing with a lot of those. Right.
And we mentioned the Batmobiles. Obviously, there's more of the those movies starting to come out and get kind of creative. The
one I want to bring up the most, it's pretty iconic, but that has nothing to do with performance, is clearly the family truckster.
I was just about to talk about that, because that was a Barris creation as well. And that
excess,
just weird random stuff, but that's kind of what it was. And they smashed some of it up and had their grandma on the roof. And
right. Well, I mean,
all of that
again, too, the one when they send that thing, when they're at the Grand Canyon and they're going through they get lost on the dirt road and they end up launching that thing. I mean, if you watch that back and forth, which me being a kid of the 80s on a VHS recorder, I would rewind that tape to watch the thing just absolutely bend the car in half.
Yeah.
But, that's the kind of stuff they did in movies. That's how it happened.
No, and that's, I mean, in that time period too, had a lot of those same things like the TV shows did where, so you had the Family Truckster and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Ghostbusters.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
They were based in basically a fire station
Yeah.
in New York, but they weren't driving a fire truck.
No.
It was a 60s like ambulance.
It's a hearse.
Probably was a hearse maybe.
Right. Yeah.
60s Cadillac ambulance, but
Yeah.
with all the weird sci-fi ghost trap, ectoplasm stuff on it. And,
Right.
it's making, yes, that car on its own would have stood out probably in the 80s being an old
Unusual
60s
right.
car.
Right.
But yeah, you add the logo on the side, you add all the accessories. It's
What else are you going to drive
the-
to go catch a ghost in, right?
yeah. I mean, you need a hearse.
That's what I'm saying.
For
You're
the
not going to
ghost.
pull up in a Buick, right?
Yeah. And the same kind of thing too of Back to the Future, the DeLorean.
Right.
The DeLorean was looked at and thought of it, as a futuristic kind of a car.
Sure.
Different material, different design, the gull wings,
Yeah.
all of that. So it lent perfectly to a futuristic movie.
Right.
And of course they added all the blender and, all the flux capacitor
Sure.
and stuff on it to
Right.
do that. And what's funny is, we talk about Barris and the Family Truckster and being involved in a lot of these. He actually got a cease and desist many years later from the studio from Back to the Future because, Barris Customs, they obviously did a lot of stuff for the movies and the industry, but in later years, they would make replicas
Right.
of some of the iconic movie cars that maybe they didn't have anything to do with.
Sure.
But just to tour around or, show off and stuff like that. Well, they did that with the DeLorean, and the guy who was the producer of it, who actually kind of helped in the design and made it look, sent a cease and desist.
Yeah.
Like basically you didn't build that.
Right.
You can't portray that you built it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
knock it off.
Right.
Basically.
Well,
So,
And,
but that's the thing is like now you kind of, everyone that has a DeLorean, like either, guys will make them look like, the Back to the Future one,
Right.
or you have a DeLorean, they go, oh, Back to the Future car.
Right.
So that, I mean, cause that car didn't really go anywhere or go beyond anything.
right.
It kind of got,
But remember, that's
put
part
into
of the,
that.
But that's part of the character.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, even Marty McFly says he made a time machine out of a DeLorean, but the way he
Yeah.
says it as it's derogatory. Like at that time in, 1989, when that movie came
Yeah.
out, the DeLoreans were like, it still had a scandal tied to it. It's and
People didn't want,
they weren't good cars. They were not reliable. They were weird. They were that stainless steel, version, but they worked that into the character. They said, oh, it's the reason why it's, Doc Brown it's stainless steel construction makes it perfect for time travel. Right. I mean, so they wrote that into
Yeah.
it. Now, the one thing though I want to bring up though, because obviously, yes, Back to the Future is about the DeLorean, but for me,
for a lot of
For
the
me,
guys in the 80s
right.
that
It's that
wanted
black,
that Marty
black,
McFly.
Yep. The black Toyota 4-wheel drive extra cab. That was something that just every one of us
KC
was
highlights on the roof.
Yep.
Roll bar.
gotta have it.
Yeah.
Right.
And what's really cool is several years ago, Toyota kind of even brought that back
Yeah.
and did like a modern version and,
Yes.
repurpose it, so it's pretty cool too sometimes when, like you said, with Miami Vice, Ferrari got behind them.
Right.
GMC was, involved in several of the TV shows.
Yeah.
Toyota recognized that was an iconic vehicle, that was out there. So they appreciated that. So,
Absolutely.
and that's kind of bringing us in a little bit, into the 90s and into kind of, I mean, probably the franchise that has the most iconic cars. And that would be the Fast and Furious.
Yeah, and Fast came out in '99, right? So there was a time where car movies, car TV shows kind of subsided. The kind of the honeymoon was over.
It just, everything has a different change and a different shift. And
Right.
yeah, a lot of the cars in the 90s maybe weren't all that cool.
I mean, I look at that time as like, you know, the strange times, like, you know, you look at Wayne's World where they're making like a Pacer cool.
Well, yeah. So we actually found, you know, a kind of a listing of a lot of these, and I'm looking right now at the 90s, and yeah, they mentioned the Pacer, the Wayne's World,
right? Which they made a limo out of too. Remember Wayne's World Part 2? They made the limo out of,
true.
Right?
No, and then it's like, yeah, the Big Lebowski had
the Gran
Torino
yeah.
that was beat up.
Yeah.
Another Pacer, maybe even the same one for Good Burger.
Okay.
You know, that was all
probably
done up
was
as
the same one.
delivery
Yeah.
you know, vehicle. So there wasn't, you know, really too many aside from your James Bond.
Yeah.
You know, Jurassic Park had like their Jeeps and their Explorers that were just painted.
Yeah.
You know, nothing that
Nothing
stood
too great,
out
right.
necessarily. So when the Fast and the Furious came on, it really kind of kicked off, and so they were starting to make that in the late 90s. Came out in 2001.
Oh, is that when it came out? Okay.
But they obviously started production on it in 2000, and they really looked to the legit, you know, tuner industry and community in Southern California and beyond a little bit to not only just straight source some of these cars, but, you know, to some of the builders to customize ones that they wanted as the, you know, the standout, the character ones, the main character ones.
So the guy that comes to, you know, obviously Craig Lieberman is your first person that, you know, he was actually the car wrangler, which we should mention what a car wrangler is.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, basically what a car wrangler is he's a guy that will seek out cars.
Yeah.
You know, the movie, the director might have a car in mind. He might say, I want a red Ferrari with gold wheels on it. The car wrangler will go out and find that car for them. Okay.
And then they might contract with a company or a builder, or he may have, you know, that to then, if maybe that Ferrari that you wanted red didn't have gold wheels.
Right.
Well, now it's got gold wheels on it.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So, and I'll have to say, without Craig, I mean, we wouldn't have obviously the orange Supra that, you know, obviously Paul Walker owed, you know, Vin Diesel. Yeah. But also too, another guy that brings up, that comes to mind, because I was involved with a little bit of that stuff for the first movie, is Robert Wilson, who at the time owned a company called Modern Image, which was one of the first vinyl sticker graphic stores. You know, Robert was and it's kind of funny. Robert was he was a tech, or I should say a tech. He was a porter at Newport Beach Ferrari. So that's where a lot of and that's kind of the same thing. With him and Craig, they knew each other. Yeah. And obviously that was kind of a way of, you know, hey, Robert knows a lot about, you know, expensive cars. But Robert had his sign company going on, and a lot of the graphics, obviously
you can see the MI Modern Image on the hood,
on the green Eclipse. That was, you know, obviously something that was all Robert that did all that.
Well, and that's the thing too, is, you know, the technology of that was allowing for those graphics and allowing for that style.
Right.
But that also did help the movie industry, because now you could wrap a car another color, or you could put a badge, you know, or something on there, you know, that actually, you know, would have taken a long time to paint or recreate. So it just kind of helped that industry more, and they kind of leaned into that.
Oh, definitely.
You know, obviously the maybe the anti-hero car, like basically, you know, Vin Diesel's car was the Charger. Yeah. And, you know, their kind of idea with that was like, that was his, you know, dad's race car.
Right.
Then here's all the import cars. So it's kind of like the old, you know, versus the new, you know, like kind of the old muscle cars going away, the import cars now kind of being the racing, you know, kind of a deal. But they've kind of, throughout that whole franchise of, you know, the 10 plus movies, because there's the spin-offs and all that, you know, they've kind of weaved in and out of realism.
Exactly.
And they've weaved in and out of, you know, the muscle cars and the import cars, you know, but the Charger, you know, was always kind of a common theme.
Obviously,
throughout, even with a newer Charger when, you know, that was reintroduced, you know, later on. Yeah. And what's kind of funny is because one of the guys that became much involved, you know, later on, and is kind of like the go-to guy now for the Fast and Furious, is Dennis McCarthy. Yes. And he owns Vehicle Effects. And, you know, he's said that, like, the Corvette thing, you know, to Ferrari thing, it's like, keep everything the same, we can interchange parts. We can rob parts off of one to put on another.
Yeah.
So like now he says like everything's got an LS.
Yes.
Even if it's a Charger.
Yeah.
It's got an LS.
Right.
You know, but of course they want that fake. They want that, you know, blower sticking through the hood, so they'll fake it and add it on top, even though we all know that a Whipple's gonna stay under the hood on
Exactly.
those. So
Well, and that I think goes back to, again, it's a movie. You want a big visual. You want someone to see that. And if you're talking about a fast car, well, if something's sticking out of the hood of something, it usually means it's fast.
yeah, that's
you know?
that's what you can visually see that, and so
Right.
it kind of not tricks your mind, but it kind of, you know, hints at your mind.
And even, you know, this is kind of funny too. Speaking of superchargers, you look at the movie industry and how they try to kind of write in part of the car into the story.
yeah, as a character.
Well, what comes up to me is, and I'm thinking about this, obviously Mad Max with his NFH Interceptor.
Yeah.
That has the blower that has a pull switch where you can turn the blower on and off, which, you know, great for the storyline, but not even realistic whatsoever.
It's like, well, and even similar to that of like the talking about Fast and Furious with Vin Diesel, and he's in Cuba with the turbo.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and it's like
They probably haven't even been introduced to turbos in Cuba.
no, but it wasn't even that. But it was like a manual turbo or something like that.
Right,
And
right.
it's like,
Well, how many times are you
That
going to hit a
doesn't
nitrous shot
exist.
too on, you know, the 5 miles they race in the first movie when they're hitting 10
when they're
10
shifting
units,
20,
yeah,
they're
20
shifting 10 times.
Right. They already melted
and
the
they're-
motor back, you know.
They're hitting the NOS, you know, a million times.
It's all Hollywood magic.
It is. But, you know, at least with the Fast and Furious, they've, depending on the director, depending
Yeah.
on the movie, it's gone, you know, somewhat back towards some realism.
Yeah.
Or trying to keep it somewhat
Well, didn't they
somewhat
send
realistic.
Didn't they send was it a Pinto that they sent to space?
Something. Yeah. It's in space, or you know, they even, you know, jumped from tower to tower in Dubai.
Right. That's right.
You know, and so yeah, there's, you know, or having something, you know, jump off a cliff, but what's really cool is they've always tried to make a lot of the cars, you know, very iconic.
Yeah.
In that, so you know, you get into the Mustang that had you know, I think a 2JZ motor.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
it,
yeah.
you know, in Japan, in
Yeah.
Tokyo Drift.
Right. David Freiberger's F-bomb Camaro that
Yeah.
they blow up in that. I want to say that's the. I always get them mixed up.
They
That was the
do start
Smuggler's
to
movie. Yeah.
blend together.
Right, that was the smuggler version.
yeah.
Okay, the concept Corvette that they jump off in Fast 5, the one that they drive out of the train and they,
Yeah.
you know,
And you mentioned that sequence, you know, where they're basically stealing the Corvette, you know, Roadster off the train. Was pretty cool. As I was actually at Dennis's shop back then when they were working on those, you know, stopped in for a visit. And of course, you know, like we mentioned, of having multiples of those cars. So they had, you know, that Corvette concept car. They had like 4 or 5 of them. And of course, they were just fiberglass bodies that they replicated and just, you know, threw them on something. But then the off-road like tow truck,
right.
you know, that was pretty cool. They were building those at the time, and that was basically like a cab from a box delivery truck, custom chassis, custom frame, you know, and then big old king coilover shocks, 4-link setup, you know, off-road tires. So it was a legit build of what it could do. Probably didn't have the power of, you know, maybe what you would have needed or wanted on that if it was realistic, but that's kind of how a lot of these were, where, you know, I remember even like an Indy replica car, you know, for a movie that had just a small block,
Right.
you know, or something in it. But, you know, it was cool seeing that because, you know, I know Dennis and some of those guys have tried to make it a little bit more legit.
Right.
But those Fast and Furious cars, a lot of those have become very iconic throughout the years and ended up in people's, you know, personal collections, and that kind of really, that franchise and some other movies kind of helped put like car movies and, you know, kind of the car character kind of back into the industry a little bit.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, Fast basically was the people were thirsty for car movies by the time Fast came out.
Yeah.
You know, and another movie that kind of helped cement that was Gone in 60 Seconds, the remake.
Yeah. Nicolas Cage, Angelina Jolie. Yeah.
And, you know, you've got obviously the Eleanor car, which is the iconic, you know, hero car, if you want to call it that.
Fastback Mustang, gray with, you know, or silver with the black racing stripes.
Exactly.
Kind of the weird, different front end, you know, but that's what makes it stand out.
Well, and the nice thing about it is it was based off of a Shelby KR500, and Steve Stanford and Chip Foose came in and put their kind of touches on it and brought that iconic car up to, at the time, the 2000s version of a KR500.
Yeah.
You know, which obviously has been remade, I don't know how many times by how many different people.
Yeah, there's been some companies that even have built replicas, have done that. You know, it's kind of like a funny thing. Like people say, "Oh, it's an Eleanor car," and it's like, but is it a real Eleanor car or is it a replica? Like you got to say it's a replica, unless it's from the actual movie or Steve Stanford or Chip Foose had their hand on it. You know, maybe then you could get away with it.
Right.
But yeah, and that was a remake of a '70s movie.
That's right. Yeah. Which is kind of a great story. Talk about the little guy. There was a guy named H.B. Heilicki who was a auto salvage wrecking yard guy. That was down in the port, you know, Wilmington area of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And he was a kind of a wannabe stunt man, was trying to break his way into Hollywood, got to know a few people, and decided that he was going to make his own movie. So he wrote, produced, directed, and starred in the original Gone in 60 Seconds.
Yeah, and which has a lot of car crashes, a lot of some of the. I was watching a couple scenes from it, and like I said, we'll get into that later on the car chase episode, but has a lot of those kind of cliches of car chases, you know, built into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that was that a Mustang?
It was a
Mustang
Mustang,
as well, but that was like a '70s Mustang.
God,
wasn't
it's like the horrible Mustang too. It's like that like
it's that Mach 1. Yeah,
it's like a Mach 1 from like 73, 74, and it's not as cool as the KR500. I mean, clearly they got that right.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. They hired the right people. They hired Steve Stanford.
Right.
You know, they went towards the people that knew what they're doing to make something iconic.
Exactly.
And that, like I said, that Fast and Furious, some of the other movies kind of fully cemented it in that then there was a movie, albeit an animated one, called Cars.
Correct.
So Disney, Pixar came out with, you know, the movie Cars in 2006.
Right.
So about the same time.
Yeah.
And those had some iconic characters that were cars that reflected their character.
Right.
You know, you had the young hotshot kind of NASCAR driver for Lightning McQueen.
Right.
Which, and I'm sure the name McQueen's no accident.
That wasn't
that
right.
was an ode to Steve McQueen
Sure.
and all the racing movies of the 70s and stuff.
Right.
But then, you had, you know, the crotchety old moonshine NASCAR car. Right. You know, you had Tomater.
Yeah, Ramon, the guy that paints his stripes, right?
Yeah.
Fillmore, that's, you know, don't go buy Fillmore stuff and drink anything. You might trip out a little bit.
No, but you had Flo's, you know, Cafe.
Right.
You know, you had the Sally, you know, and all that stuff. And
that movie is a very well-produced movie about car Americana.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of it was. It was about the Americana time where, you know, even go to Cars Land at Disneyland and they have, you know, a lot of the shops. They have the iconic, you know, desert scape that was in the movie that was kind of your old Route 66 or old, you know, kind of cross-country kind of journey. So, you know, where you had your little roadside town. Yeah. And what's cool with that was Disney actually hired a lot of, you know, some of the local painters and pinstripers, you know, car customized guys to go in and add their artwork and add some touches throughout the park at Disney to kind of lend some authenticity to it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And those, you know, those cars, obviously a lot of people have done tribute versions, or, you know, you throw some eyeballs on a windshield and you got a Lightning McQueen Cars car. But Eddie Paul, once again, was actually hired by them to make those characters into actual cars. Right. To make a drivable Lightning McQueen, make a Porsche, you know, and so they could campaign them and advertise them around and show them off.
Your movie premieres and stuff like that.
Just obviously it's an animated series, so having something that's actual, tangible in real life to have there. And we kind of then saw a little bit of that later. We're like, you get into Transformers, which was originally a cartoon. Yeah. That they started doing live action
Right.
ones, and you know, I think if you have a 5th gen or even earlier, you know, Camaro that's yellow,
Right.
it's a Bumblebee.
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things now. If
You
no
can't get
matter
away
what,
from
you
that.
can't get away from that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's another thing that's great about it is once again a car company gets behind a movie, and
Yeah, Chevrolet got involved. Give them pre-production
they give
Camaro.
their concept car.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, literally that concept car was the one that, you know, is the hero car in the movie, but that helped obviously launch the 2010 Camaro.
Yeah.
And to launch that platform for those guys was amazing. It was a great, you know, step up for those guys. So
Yeah, and that, you know, some of these cars originally have become pretty valuable, obviously.
yes,
Especially if it is one
The
of
car.
the cars,
Yeah.
not just a replica. Like I remember seeing probably about 10 years ago, Barris, you know, sold the original Batmobile, so based on that Lincoln Futura,
Right.
For a little over $1 million.
right.
Probably should have gone for more. Probably is worth a lot more now.
Right. That was a good payoff though. You only paid $1 for it. So.
Yeah, yeah. And it was built
Made his money back.
And it was built in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
by
Right.
another guy.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Technically.
So he did okay.
So yeah, I'm sure he's good. And you know, so the Fast and Furious, a lot of those cars, some of them, you know, ended it up in Paul Walker's collection,
Correct.
or they're, you know, were auctioned off or sold off. One of the ones that popped up a little bit recently, it was on Hemmings.com. They did an article about the Joe Dirt Charger that recently sold for about $330,000.
Wow, that much.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And of course it was your straight up dirt ball,
yeah.
you know, mullet, muscle car,
Right.
you know, with a Hemi.
Probably didn't have a Hemi though.
Probably didn't. And it probably wasn't an actual Daytona.
Right.
It was probably just a Charger with a wing on it.
Yeah.
And it was all beat up.
Yeah.
You know, who knows if they did a lot of the primer and damaging purposefully to make it look worse than it was,
Sure.
or they just found something like that, or
Yeah.
who knows. But you know, obviously one of the iconic things I remember and all that is that the footprint gas pedal.
Okay.
The footprint gas pedal in that, you know,
Okay.
in that Charger.
Why am I so excited about this? This is hilarious. So, Cal Custom, not California Custom, Cal Custom, which was they were a parts manufacturer in the 70s.
Okay.
That's who made those foot pedal throttles, right? The hilarious thing about it is I'm currently restoring a 67 Mustang right now for a customer.
That
Has
one
that
of
foot
those.
throttle in it, yes.
Yes. Is he
So-
keeping it?
He's keeping it. He's keeping it. Like I had to literally take it apart, and I asked him too. Do you want it restored? He said, "Oh no." So he went. And the rest of the car has been restored.
Yeah.
but that's his
like,
foot. Yep.
like a high school car.
Yep.
Like his foot's been on that for 30
Yep.
years,
Yep.
40 years. And
So yeah, that's the first thing I think of that car too is the foot throttle. But you
Yeah.
know, and again, like you said, it's a beat up, supposed to be a Dodge a Dodge Daytona. There's no way it's a Daytona.
well, they wouldn't. Yeah. We know how Mopar guys are,
Yeah.
you know, where everything's number matching, authentic. Like it's got the undercoating in
Right.
the right spots, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it would have been probably way out of budget to, you know, take an actual Daytona and beat the hell out of it and
But we've all seen
thrash
it. But we probably all know a Joe Dirt. Somebody that's
Yeah.
got the car that they've always wanted, but they can't afford to restore it, so they're just going to hang on to it
But
for
hey,
as long as they can.
I will say at least, and so with the Lamborghini Countach, you know, 25th anniversary coupe that was in the Wolf of Wall Street that was completely wrecked and Leo's, you know, falling out of, that one, you know, did sell. It was expected to sell for about 1.5 to 2 million.
Okay.
Sold for 1.5.
yeah.
But they actually used 2 of those
Really?
in there because obviously one was crashed.
Well, right. Yeah.
So the backup, I guess the hero car was actually the one that they crashed
Okay.
because he had to drive it around. So maybe
Yeah.
that, and then the backup Lambo was in a couple shots. Maybe they had to do some reshoots or something like that.
Sure.
So
Can you imagine being the guy that's like, okay, take this perfectly nice car,
yeah,
and now you're going to crash it, right?
who knows? But you know, I'm curious actually. Wonder if there's a Lamborghini Countach on Hemmings.
Take a look. Pretty iconic
That we
car.
can see. Yeah.
I mean, you can't grow up through the 80s without having that poster on your wall.
That's true. Got a 86 Lamborghini Countach, red,
Yeah.
which is definitely going to get you in trouble.
Oh yeah.
And 26,000 miles on it.
Yeah.
And, of course, price, inquire.
Of course.
That's basically, if you think you need to ask, you cannot
have it in
afford
mind.
it.
Yeah, you don't have
If
enough
you need to
money.
ask, can't afford it.
Yep. Yeah.
There is one that's listed, it's an 89 for 579,000.
Okay. Back when those cars were out, they were so different than anything else on the road.
Yeah.
That's what made that car so iconic. Where now you look and you're like, is that a McLaren or is that the new Ferrari? Right?
The designs are a little similar, and especially you get into aerodynamics, a lot of them are. But even then, back then, like I said, the Damaso Pantera, Lambo, like they're all had some similarities and stuff.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But yeah, the 89 is the same year as the one in Wolf of Wall Street.
Is it?
And yeah, because that's the 25th anniversary
Okay, yeah.
edition and stuff. But yeah, this thing's got 6,000 miles on it, so obviously,
Wow.
it's kind of one of those things. Did you not drive it as much because you wanted to keep it nice,
Right.
or just was it not
Hard to drive.
comfortable to drive?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing you're going to get sometimes
Yeah.
with those cars. But from a non-car movie, that was an iconic thing because yeah, if you're a scheming, Wall Street,
Right.
guy, then yeah, of course you're going to get the Lambo and try to be cool and show off.
Sure. Sure.
Then wreck it when you're
Greed is
high
good.
off of your balls.
Yes. Yes. That's right.
Obviously, that wasn't a car movie. That was a Joe Dirt movie.
Yes.
But had an iconic car in it. And a lot of the ones that we've talked about, except for your Fast and Furious, except for your Gone in 60 Seconds, they weren't necessarily car-centric movies, but one of the characters was a very standout car. So I think for the next one, I think let's get in a little more towards like some of the racing movies and the very car-centric movies and kind of some of the behind the scenes of what goes into making that all happen and getting these cars on film, to make them realistic, to make it feel like you're driving it or you're there at the race, but obviously you're not. So I think for the next episode, we're going to talk about car movies instead of movie cars.